My name is Elena Marsh. I am 56 years old, and I spent 34 years as a naval officer. Most of it in work I was not permitted to talk about. Inside rooms my family never knew existed. For decades, I came home to the same table, the same dismissal, the same comfortable assumption that I was the quiet one who had not amounted to much. And then one morning, at a mess hall on a naval base in Southern California, a Navy SEAL put his hand on my shoulder and shoved me toward the door. And 4 Admirals walked in. Have you ever had someone in your life decide who you are and spend years proving they were right without ever once checking? If so, tell me your story in the comments. I read every single one. Before I get into what happened, I'd love to know where you're watching from. And if you have ever been the person in your family that nobody really looked at until the room made them, hit like and subscribe. I grew up in Virginia Beach. My father was a chief petty officer in the United States Navy, Warren Marsh, and he died in a training accident off the coast of Virginia in 1977. I was 7 years old. I did not fully understand what had happened for several days after the chaplain came to the door. I remember the way my mother stood in the doorframe. Not falling, not dramatic, just very still, as if she had been waiting for something. And this was the shape it had finally taken. I remember the chaplain's hands. He held his cover in front of him with both hands, which is the thing they are trained to do. I remember that Linda, who was 10, stood behind our mother and cried. I did not cry. I watched the chaplain's face and tried to memorize the exact look of it, the expression a person wears when they are delivering news that cannot be taken back. I understood it in one single moment, 2 days later, when I was sitting on the back porch of our rental house near the Naval Air Station. I understood that he had given his life to something he believed in, that the something was real, that it existed, that it had weight, that it was bigger than our house, bigger than Virginia Beach, bigger than anything I could see from the back porch. And I understood, in the particular way that 7-year-olds understand things without being able to articulate them, that I wanted to spend my life in the same vicinity of that weight. Not out of grief, not out of a wish to follow him, out of the recognition that whatever he had been doing mattered in a way that very few things matter, and that mattering seemed like the most important possible use of a life. My mother, Patricia, was 29 when my father died. She had 2 daughters. Linda was 10, I was 7. And she was left to raise both of us on a government widow's benefit and a school administrator's salary. She is not a soft woman. She has never been soft in any way that the word usually implies. Not in emotion, not in expectation, not in the way she distributed her attention across her 2 daughters. She is practical and precise, and she has always loved Linda and me in the way that certain mothers love their children. Thoroughly, but not demonstratively, the way a structure loves a building. She held the family together with the same expression she uses for everything. Steady, slightly tired, completely competent. She did not have the luxury of falling apart, and to her credit, she never did. She went back to work the week after the funeral. She attended Linda's school play that spring. She drove me to swim lessons on Saturday mornings without complaint. She kept going, and she expected us to keep going, and we did, because there was no other option that she made available. Linda was the elder and the easier of us. Linda was social and beautiful and interested in the things that girls in Virginia Beach in the 1970s and 80s were interested in: cheerleading, homecoming court, the boyfriend from the good family. She was not the heir to our father's seriousness, and nobody asked her to be. That was always implicitly my assignment, and it was not one I was given. It was one I recognized and claimed the way you claim a thing that has your name on it, even before you know your own name well enough to read it. I read naval history when I was 12. I found the books in the library, some of them were older than my father, and I checked them out in stacks of 3 and 4 and read them at the kitchen table in the evenings after homework. My mother never commented on the books. I think she saw them. I think she understood what they meant. She said nothing, which was its own kind of permission. I was not reading about battles. I want to be clear about that. I was reading about how people make decisions when the cost of the wrong one is irreversible. I was reading about command. What it meant to be responsible for a thing that extended beyond yourself, to make choices that other people's lives depended on. That is what interested me then, and what has interested me for every one of the 34 years since. The rest of it, the rank, the stars, the ceremonies, has always been peripheral to that central question. When I was 15, my mother told me I was not going to join the Navy. She said it the way she says most things, flatly, with no cruelty, as a statement of the way the world was. "The Navy killed your father," she said. "You are not going to give it the chance to kill you." I did not argue with her. Arguments with my mother tend not to be productive because she is not persuaded by argument. She is persuaded by evidence. And the only evidence that was going to move her was time. I went to my room and kept reading. I kept swimming. I kept my grades. I kept going, which is the thing she had always modeled for me, the thing she had always asked of us, and which I had understood, by 15, was the actual lesson she had been teaching all along. 3 years later, I was accepted to the United States Naval Academy at Annapolis. I brought the letter home on a Friday afternoon in March and showed it to my mother at the kitchen table. She read it. She set it on the counter. She did not pick it up again. She did not say anything for a long time. Then she said, "You have made up your mind?" I said yes. She turned and started making dinner. That was the last real conversation we had about my career for approximately 38 years. I do not say that with anger. I say it because it is true and because it matters for what comes later. Tyler Callahan came into my life in 1999. He is Linda's son, hers and Roger's, and he was born in a hospital in Richmond on a cold January morning when the temperature had dropped below freezing overnight and the parking lot was glazed with ice. I had driven up from Washington, where I was stationed at the time. I was on leave between assignments. I was a lieutenant commander at that point, 04, 12 years in, working in a part of naval intelligence that I could not describe to my family then and cannot fully describe even now. I was 30 years old, and I had already spent a decade doing work that mattered in rooms that none of my family would ever enter. Linda let me hold Tyler in the hallway outside her room before the grandparents came in. He was warm and very small, and when I settled him against my arm, he wrapped one hand around my index finger with a grip that was stronger than I expected. Considering the circumstances, he had been in the world for less than 2 hours. Roger appeared in the doorway behind me. "Do not get too attached," he said, with the easy familiarity of a man who says casual things in serious moments because he cannot locate the serious thing to say. "She is never around." He meant it as a joke, I think, or an observation. With Roger, it has always been difficult to tell the difference because with Roger, the cruelty and the carelessness look exactly the same from the outside. I did not respond to him. I looked at Tyler. I made a decision standing in that hospital hallway with the fluorescent lights overhead and the ice on the parking lot below, that I was going to be someone worth finding when he got old enough to look for people worth finding. That was the commitment I made. I made it privately, the way I make most of my commitments, which is to say, I made it without telling anyone, and then I simply kept it. I kept that promise across 27 years. I kept it imperfectly. I was not around the way a mother is around, or the way a sibling is around, because my career did not permit that kind of consistent presence. And because the nature of classified work is that you are often physically present without being able to explain where you have been before, or why you are going again. But I called. I sent letters that said little and meant much. I appeared at birthdays when the schedule allowed and at graduations without exception. I remembered which books he had loved at 10 and which teams he had followed at 14. I watched Tyler grow from a child who was drawn to the water into a teenager who swam laps before school every morning without being asked into a young man who had already decided, well before he said it out loud to his parents, that he was going to be a Navy SEAL. I want to tell you about Roger Callahan. He is Linda's husband. They married in 1991 when Linda was 24 and Roger was 26. And he has spent his adult life in the immediate proximity of military work without ever serving in it himself. He is a defense contractor. He has built a career on logistics supply chains and government procurement and the particular set of relationships that form between civilian contractors and the agencies they serve. He is not unintelligent. He is not without professional competence. He has done real work and built a real career in a complicated industry, and I am not dismissing any of that. What I am telling you about is the other thing. The way he talks about the military, the way a man talks about a subject he has studied extensively but never practiced. With the confidence of someone who has a very precise external understanding of something and no internal understanding whatsoever. He knows the jargon, he reads the trade publications, he attends the conferences. He has, for 30 years, talked about the military. about tactics, about strategy, about procurement, about what the branches do well and do badly. With the certainty of someone who has never had to make a decision inside those structures, which is to say, with a certainty that could not be earned any other way. I was his curiosity, not his object of malice. Roger is not built for malice, which would require a sustained emotional investment that is not really in his nature. I was his condescension. At Thanksgiving dinner in 2014, he was explaining to the assembled family the structural inefficiencies of the naval planning apparatus. He had been at a conference the previous week. He had talked to someone. He had strong opinions. I was a rear admiral at this point, 07, lower half, 1 star. I had been doing exactly the work he was describing, in rooms he would never see, for 22 years. I sat across from Roger and ate my turkey and listened to him explain to me the things I had spent my career doing. When he paused and turned to me with the easy generosity of someone including the quietest person in the conversation and said, "No offense, Elena, but you have been in planning for what? 20 years? The problem with the Navy is too many desk people and not enough door kickers," I said. "Something like that?" He nodded. Satisfied? Moved on. Across the table, Tyler, who was 15 and already swimming before school every morning, was watching my face. He did not say anything. He was not old enough to say anything. He just watched. Even at 15, he had the quality that would later make him a very good operator. He was paying attention to the things that no one else in the room had thought to notice. Tyler graduated high school in 2017 and told his parents over dinner that he wanted to enlist. Roger said the washout rate for buds was 90% and suggested Tyler would be better served coming to work at his firm. He had connections, he said. Real connections, unlike whatever it was Elena did. Linda looked at her plate. I sat beside Tyler on the back porch afterward, and he asked me directly, with the honesty that he has always brought to direct questions, whether I thought he could do it. I looked him in the eye. I said yes. He asked how I knew. I said because I have watched you in the water for 18 years, and I know what that looks like when it is real, and what you have is real. Roger came outside with his wine glass and announced that Elena had never been downrange a day in her life. So what would she know? I did not respond. There was nothing to respond to. I should tell you clearly that I had, at the point Roger said that, been downrange on more occasions than I can enumerate in this narration. I have been in places I cannot name, doing work I cannot fully describe, under conditions that make the word downrange feel inadequate. I said nothing to Roger, not because I was intimidated and not because I lacked the words. I said nothing because I had stopped needing Roger Callahan to understand me somewhere around year 12 of his not understanding me. There is a particular peace that arrives when you finally accept that some people have decided who you are, and that decision has nothing to do with who you actually are, and that their decision and your reality can coexist indefinitely without any resolution ever being required. Tyler completed basic underwater demolition SEAL training in 2021. He was 22 years old. I was in the family bleachers at the completion ceremony in civilian clothes, jeans, a light jacket, sunglasses, nothing to distinguish me from anyone else sitting there. I was a vice admiral at this point, 1 rank below the top of the Navy. Roger was beside Linda in the bleachers, telling the family next to them about Tyler's attributes, which were, in Roger's telling, genetic inheritances from the Callahan side. I sat 8 seats away and watched Tyler receive his trident, and I felt a pride that I did not know how to contain in a polite, casual expression, so I settled for stillness. After the ceremony, Tyler found me in the crowd. He held the hug longer than usual, which for Tyler is already longer than most people's long. He said quietly, his voice close to my ear, that he knew what I had done. I told him I had not done anything. He said, "You showed up." He meant it simply, without calculation. He was not making a larger point. He just meant, you came. You have always come. You are here. He did not know then that showing up was the thing I had always done best, or that being there in those bleachers had required moving a classified command briefing and canceling 2 calls with Allied intelligence counterparts. I did not tell him. It was not the point. In early 2025, Roger called me directly. He had not done that in years. Our relationship had always been mediated through Linda, through the family group chat, through the shared events of holiday gatherings, through the infrastructure of a blended family that functions by making as few direct connections as necessary. He called on a Thursday afternoon and opened with 2 full minutes of warmth. He recalled specific Thanksgivings, a birthday party, a phone call I had no memory of. He asked how I was. He said he hoped the Navy was treating me well, with the phrasing of someone who thinks the Navy is a job you work at rather than an institution you serve inside of. And then he asked me to make a call. A logistics contract, Department of Defense, stalled in the procurement pipeline. He had been working on it for 2 years. He knew people, he said, but not quite the right people, not people at the right level. He was not asking for anything improper, he said. Just a word in the right ear, just someone like me saying a name in a room he did not have access to. I told him I could not do that. He said we were family. I said I knew we were. He asked if that meant I was going to help him. I said no. He was quiet. Then he began to say something about support, about how he had always supported me, how the family had always supported me. And he caught himself in the middle of it because even Roger could hear at that moment what was about to come out of his mouth. The support he was describing had a very specific shape, and the shape it was taking was the shape of a transaction. I told him I had to go. I ended the call. I sat in my office afterward, the office I cannot describe to my family, in the command that Roger had no idea I held. And I looked at the wall for a moment, not at anything in particular, just at the space of it, the accumulated weight of 33 years of service that occupied that room and every room like it. I felt completely clear, not vindicated, not relieved, not angry, just clear. The way everything gets clear when a pressure you have been managing for a long time is finally simply acknowledged and set down. 3 months after that phone call, on the morning of April 26th, 2026, I drove myself to Naval Amphibious Base, Coronado, in a rented sedan. No aide-de-camp, no staff vehicle, no advance notification sent to the Public Affairs Office. Just me and a rental car and a leather bag with a change of clothes for the ceremony that afternoon, and a set of classified briefing materials for the command review that morning. Tyler had completed his Advanced Naval Special Warfare qualification. This is not BUD/S. That is the beginning. This is what comes years after BUD/S, for operators who have been through the teams and have proven themselves and are being prepared for the next tier of leadership. It is grueling and long, and the people who complete it tend to be the people the Navy most wants to keep. Tyler had completed it. The ceremony was that afternoon at 1400 hours, and families were invited. Admiral Marsh, the other version of me that my family had never met, had a classified command review scheduled for that morning. The review had been on the books for 6 weeks. It was why I had been on the West Coast at all. The two things, the aunt and the admiral, happened to occupy the same 24-hour window, which happens more than you might expect in a career that has always had difficulty distinguishing between the personal and the professional. I arrived at the main gate at 600 hours. The gate guard read my identification, and his posture changed in the specific way it changes when a person in civilian clothes presents credentials that carry that particular weight. He said nothing. I offered nothing. I drove to the administrative building, parked, and decided that since I had 2 hours before the command review began, and since the morning was clear and the water was visible from the base road, I would walk to the mess hall for coffee. I have always preferred arriving early. It gives you a few minutes of a place before the place has prepared itself for your presence. I find those minutes clarifying. The mess hall was restricted to base personnel at that hour. Family day did not begin until 0900. I was in dark jeans, a gray jacket, flat shoes. I got coffee from the counter, a tall cup, black the way I have taken it since 1992. And I sat at a table near the window that looked out over the water. The base was beginning its morning. I could hear the water, and I could hear, from somewhere beyond the building, the beginning sounds of another day of training. I have been sitting in rooms like that one for 34 years. The smell is identical across every base in every country and every time zone I have worked in. Institutional coffee, if there is coffee, and underneath it, something metallic and clean that I have come to understand is specific to rooms where serious work gets done. Salt air here, because we were on the coast. It is one of the most comfortable combinations of smells I know. It means I am in the right place. I had no briefing documents out, no phone, nothing to read. I was simply sitting and looking at the water and not requiring anything of myself, which is something I have learned over the decades to do without guilt. Senior Chief Petty Officer Daniel Rook entered the mess hall at 6:22 through the side corridor. He was in his working uniform, the practical worn-in kind that operators favor over the dress uniform's formality. He was built the way SEAL operators tend to be built after a decade and a half of actual work. Not theatrical about it, just functional, the body as a working tool rather than a display. He moved through the room with the confidence of someone who has been the most capable person in every room he has entered for the past 10 years. That confidence is earned. It is real. In his case, it was also missing approximately one critical piece of information. He noticed me the moment he entered the room. A middle-aged woman in civilian clothes at a table that should not have had a middle-aged woman in civilian clothes at it. He crossed the room toward me. "Ma'am, this area is restricted. Family Day does not begin until 0900. I did not turn around. I took a sip of my coffee. "Ma'am, did you hear me?" I set the cup down on the table. I did not stand. He told me he was going to need me to come with him. And then he reached forward with the efficiency of a man who has decided that a conversation is concluded and a physical situation needs to be resolved. And he put his hand on my shoulder. He shoved, not hard, not with violence, but with the decisive physical redirect of someone who does not believe that the person being redirected has any standing in the situation. My body tipped forward. I caught the edge of the table with both hands. I turned. I faced him. He said, I said, "Move." I looked at him. He was 38 years old. He was very good at his job, a job that is genuinely difficult and genuinely dangerous, and that he had spent his career doing with real skill. He had also just made the most significant professional error of his career. He did not know this yet. I said nothing. The doors at the far end of the mess hall opened, not the side door, the large main doors that faced the corridor leading to the command wing. All four of them came through together, mid-conversation, the way people come through doors when they are mid-thought and not expecting to need to stop. Vice Admiral Patrick Drummond, Rear Admiral James Carver, Rear Admiral Christine Yu, Rear Admiral Marcus Bell. They had received the classified review notification 6 weeks ago. They had not been notified that I was arriving 2 hours early. They were coming through the mess hall on their way to the command wing because it was the most direct route and it was barely past 0600 and no one had flagged any reason to take a different one. They saw me. The conversation stopped. Not gradually, all at once, in the same instant, 4 separate people stopping a sentence in the middle of a word. And then, also, in the same instant, not a beat apart, all 4 of them came to attention. Chins level, hands at their sides, backs straight. The specific stillness that senior officers adopt when they are in the presence of someone who outranks them by enough that the deference is not performative, but simply correct. Vice Admiral Drummond spoke first because he was the most senior person in the room other than me. "Admiral Marsh." "We did not realize you had arrived early, ma'am. The briefing room is ready whenever you are." I said, "Thank you, Patrick. Give me a moment." I turned back to Rook. He had not moved from the position he had been in when the doors opened. His face had undergone a complete internal reorganization, and the face that emerged from the process had lost every ounce of its previous certainty. He was not panicking. He had been a professional too long to panic. But I could watch the recalibration happening in real time, the rearrangement of every piece of information he had assembled about the situation in the past 60 seconds. I said, "Thank you, Senior Chief." I picked up my coffee. I walked toward my admirals. At the doorway, at the back of the mess hall, the doorway near the coffee station signs, which is where the signs had directed families who arrived before 0900, Linda had stopped moving. She had come in for coffee, she told me later. Roger had followed her. They had not been inside for more than 30 seconds. Linda's hand was on the door handle behind her, as if she had not yet committed to fully entering the room. Roger's hand was frozen at the midpoint of its travel between the table and his face, coffee cup suspended, his elbow bent at an angle that suggested he had been mid-motion when his brain had interrupted the signal. I did not look at them. I walked through the mess hall and into the corridor. Behind me, the room settled into its new understanding of what had happened in it. I do not want to describe what I felt in that corridor as triumphant. I want to be precise about this, because the imprecise version would get it wrong in a way that matters. What I felt was not triumph. It was not vindication. It was something quieter than both of those. A correction, the way a mechanism corrects itself when the thing that was preventing it from working properly is finally removed. 34 years of being explained and categorized and filed away. The quiet one, the desk worker, the daughter who chose paperwork over people, the aunt who was never really there, and none of it felt avenged in that corridor. It felt simply like it had never been true, and now the room knew it had never been true, which was different from triumph in the way that facts are different from feelings. The command review began at 0800 and lasted until noon. It went well. The ceremony that afternoon was held in a sun-filled hall with folding chairs and flags, and the particular combination of formality and relief that marks completions of this kind. Tyler received his qualification designation in front of his unit, his family, and the assembled command. He was completely composed, the way the best operators are composed, not performing it, but simply inhabiting it, the stillness of someone who has done something very hard and knows it and does not need to announce it. When he found me in the crowd after the ceremony, his expression was different from the one he had worn at the BUD/S ceremony 5 years earlier. He had aged in the exact right ways. He asked if something had happened that morning. He said the guys were talking. I told him not to worry about it. He looked at me for a long moment and then he said, "Aunt Ellie, what are you exactly?" I allowed myself a small smile. I told him, "Commander, Naval Special Warfare Command." He went completely quiet. Then he laughed. One short, complete, real laugh. Then he was quiet again, and I could see him running the calculation. Every visit, every carefully empty answer to a direct question, every time I had appeared at a base somewhere, and he had assumed he understood why. Roger found me near the reception tables approximately an hour later. He came at me with his hand extended and a smile I recognized as his recovery smile. Wide and warm in the specific way that warmth functions as a forward defense. "Elena, my God." He shook my hand with both of his. "4 stars. Why did you never say anything?" I looked at his hands. I shook back because I am not a rude woman. He began to say something about how, obviously, they had always known I was accomplished, how Linda had always said, how the family had always. From beside him, Linda said quietly, "Roger, stop." He did not stop immediately, but something in the way she said it, a particular flatness that I had not heard in Linda's voice in the 30 years I had known her, made him eventually, slowly, stop. That evening I sat with my mother on a bench outside the ceremonial hall while the families around us collected their things and said their goodbyes. Patricia had said almost nothing since the morning. She sat beside me, and after a while she turned and looked at me directly, which she does less often than you might expect from a mother. "You could have told me," she said. I said that most of it had been classified. She said not all of it. I said no, not all of it. A long pause. She started a sentence about my father and stopped in the middle of it. I told her I knew. We sat there together with that knowledge between us, unspoken and perfectly understood. And it was enough. For the first time in a long time, it was actually enough. 2 days after the ceremony, Roger called. He began the call warmly, in the same register he had tried at the reception, the reconstructed warmth of someone who now had new information and was reorganizing his approach around it. Then about 4 minutes in, he asked about the logistics contract. The same contract. One word from someone at my level. Just one call. I said no. He said we were family. I said I knew. He pressed. He invoked Linda and Tyler and 30 years of family dinners that he wanted to reframe, retroactively as support. I let him make his case. When he finished, I told him I had to go. Linda called 1 hour later. She did not defend him. She said she was sorry. She went through a list. The Thanksgiving in 2014, Tyler's graduation in 2017, the Bud S ceremony in 2021, the specific moments at which she should have said something about the way Roger talked about my career, and had not. She listed them the way someone lists things they have been carrying for a long time and have finally decided to set down. I told her it was all right. She said it was not, though. I said no. But it did not have to be fixed tonight. Roger's contract fell through the following month. The procurement timeline had shifted, and his firm was not competitively priced, and the award went to someone else. He called me a second time. I did not pick up. He called Linda and told her I had done this. Linda, for the first time that I am aware of in 30 years of their marriage, did not say, "I am sure that is not true." 1 month after the ceremony, Linda told me she had asked Roger to move out temporarily. She said it on a phone call in the measured voice she uses when she has already made a decision and is simply reporting it. She said that when Roger had come home after losing the contract, the first thing out of his mouth was that I had done it. She said she had been standing in her kitchen listening to him, and she had realized that she had run out of the sentence. The sentence was, "I am sure that is not true." She had said it so many times for so many years that she had simply reached the end of it. I did not tell her I was glad. I am not sure I was glad. What I felt was something closer to grief. For the years of it, for the energy Linda had spent maintaining a version of the world that did not correspond precisely to the actual world. She is 59 years old. She has been doing this particular kind of work for 30 years. The grief is the appropriate response to that. Patricia came to visit me in May. She has never been to one of my postings. In 34 years of my career, my mother has visited me at a base exactly 0 times before this one. She sat in my office on a Tuesday morning in the chair across from my desk, and she looked at the room. The flags, the commendations, the rank board, the photograph of the current Joint Chiefs on the wall. She was quiet for a long time. She asked how long I had been an admiral. I told her since 2022. She asked what I had been before that. I told her vice admiral before that, rear admiral before that, captain before that, going back in a line that reaches to 1992. She sat with that. Then she asked why I had never told her. I said most of it I legally could not. I said some of it I had not been sure she would want to hear. She said she would have wanted to hear. I said, I know, now. She saw the photograph on my desk. It is the Naval Academy graduation, 1992, the letter that she had set on the kitchen counter without picking it up, the decision she had not acknowledged, the beginning of the sentence I spent 34 years finishing, the same photograph she had texted me the week after the mess hall. Found it, she had said, with a picture of a 22-year-old in dress whites. She looked at it for a long time. Then she said that she had had a copy in a box in her closet and had never put it out because she had not known what to put out. What she was telling me, in her particular way of telling things, was that she had been proud for 34 years without knowing how to display it. My mother is 78 years old. She is not going to become a different woman. That is not what I was hoping for, and it is not what happened. What happened is that she sat in my office and she told me the truth that she had been carrying in a box in her closet. And I received it for exactly what it was. Linda came to visit in June. We sat on my small porch in the late afternoon and ate dinner and watched the light change on the water, and she told me, without any preamble, that she had read my Naval Academy acceptance letter, the one my mother had set on the counter in 1988. She said she had read every word of it after I went to bed that night. She said she had thought it was the most impressive thing she had ever seen in her life. I asked why she had not said so. She said she was 21 years old and she did not know how. I told her it was 38 years ago. She said she was still sorry. And then she said, I was always proud of you, Elena. I let Roger be the loudest thing in the room, and he was never proud of anything he could not take credit for. I held that sentence for a long time. I did not respond to it immediately. I'm not sure I have fully responded to it yet, but I kept it. Tyler deployed in July. He called me the morning before he left. He asked if it ever got easier. Being what I was, carrying what I carried, knowing what I knew. I told him it changes. That is different from easier. He asked if I would worry about him. I told him I had been worrying about him since 1999. A long pause. He said, knowing the specifics, knowing how these things actually go, does it make it better or worse? I said, better. Always better to know. He was quiet. Then he said, thank you, Aunt Ellie. I said, come home. He said, yes, ma'am. There were months in between. The command continued, large and demanding and consequential in ways that I can describe only in the broadest terms. There was one particular night in late October when something we had been planning for a long time concluded exactly as it was supposed to conclude. And I sat in the operations center at 0300 and received the confirmation and was quiet for a moment and then thanked my team. I walked outside. The base was pre-dawn still. I stood and looked at the water, and I thought about my father. About what it had meant to him, all of this, the thing he gave his life to. And I thought that it had meant exactly this. Not any particular moment of recognition or rank or ceremony. Just this. Standing at 0300 when the thing that needed to happen has happened and the people who needed to be protected are still alive. In October, Roger sent a letter. Handwritten, mailed. I read it once, carefully. He did not ask for anything in it. He apologized in the way Roger apologizes, which is to say he apologized to the version of himself he had wished he had been, rather than directly to me. But it was something. It was not quite enough. It was something. I put it in my desk drawer and did not respond immediately, because I have learned over the years that not every decision needs to be made the day the question arrives. Tyler came home in February of 2027. He came back healthy and intact and changed in the specific ways that people change when they have been somewhere genuinely difficult and have brought themselves back from it whole. I was in uniform when he arrived, 4 stars on my shoulder boards, the Navy service dress blue. He stopped when he saw me, stopped completely mid-step. And he looked at the uniform the way someone looks at a thing they have been trying to picture for a long time and have now finally seen correctly. I told him not to get sentimental. He said he could not help it. I told him to try. He smiled, and then he came forward and held out his hand, and I shook it, and then I pulled him in, because I have been doing that since 1999, and there was no reason to stop. We gathered at my mother's house in March. The 4 of us, Elena, Linda, Patricia, Tyler, in the house in Virginia Beach where Linda and I grew up. Where my father is still present in the way that people who die young remain present in the physical spaces that knew them. Roger and Linda had made their separation official by then, without the drama that 30 years of his posturing might have led you to expect. Patricia made the soup she made when we were children, a thick potato soup that she has never written down and that exists only in her hands and in the memory of everyone who has ever eaten it. Linda brought the cake from the bakery Tyler has loved since he was 6. I brought wine. We sat down to dinner. We talked. Not carefully. Not in the navigated way that family dinners become when there is someone in the room whose comfort requires management. We talked the way people talk when they have decided to stop performing the version of themselves that the room requires, and to simply be whoever they actually are, and to see what that feels like when everyone does it at the same time. Tyler made all of us laugh at some point during the meal. I cannot recall now what he said. Something about the deployment, something he was permitted to describe. I remember that I laughed until I had to set my fork down, which I do not typically do, and that Linda was pressing her eyes with her napkin, and that my mother was smiling with her whole face in a way I had not seen her smile in years. Maybe decades. It was ordinary. It was the most ordinary thing that has ever happened to me, and it was the best evening I have had in a very long time. After dinner, while Linda and Tyler were in the living room, my mother and I stood at the kitchen sink and washed the dishes. She asked if I was happy. I said yes. She said I did not have to say that. I said I knew. I said, I am. She told me my father would have been very proud of me. I said I knew. She said she should have been saying so for 30 years. I told her she was saying it now. She did not reply. She handed me a dish to dry, and we stood at the sink together. The same sink, the same positions. Her washing, me drying. That we had stood in when I was 7 years old and she was 29, and we were both trying to understand how to continue being a family around the shape of the person who was no longer there. I am telling you this story because I think you may have a version of it. Not the Navy version, not the 4 Admirals in the mess hall version. Your version. Someone who decided who you are without asking. Someone who gave you a smallness that was never the right size. Someone who looked at you with full attention only when the room required them to. Here is what I have learned in 56 years. The truth about who you are does not require anyone's permission to exist. It has been true all along, on every morning that no one acknowledged it, in every room that did not know it, through every Thanksgiving where someone explained you to yourself incorrectly. It was true then. It remained true. It will continue to be true regardless of whether the room ever comes to attention. You do not need the moment of recognition. It is not nothing. Standing in that corridor after the mess hall, I felt it land, the correction, the pressure releasing. It is not nothing, but it is not the source. The source is the 34 years of arriving early. The source is the coffee you pour before the room knows you are there. The source is the decision, made somewhere in the middle of your life, to keep being the person you actually are. Not the person the room decided you were. Not the person that was easiest for everyone to file away. The person you actually are. Keep being it. Keep showing up. Keep arriving early. One morning, the doors at the far end will open, and you will not have to say a single word. I want to go back, briefly, to the Naval Academy years, to 1988 through 1992. because what happened there is relevant to everything that comes after. I am not going to give you a full accounting of 4 years at Annapolis. What I will tell you is that I arrived as the quiet daughter of a dead chief petty officer with no money and no connections and no one in my family who had attended anything like it. And I left 4 years later as an ensign who had decided, with a precision that I have not experienced before or since in terms of the clarity of a decision, exactly what kind of officer she intended to be. The Naval Academy does something to certain people, not all people. It does a variety of things to a variety of people, some of them not particularly useful. But for a specific subset, it creates a kind of internal architecture that does not exist before you arrive and cannot be removed after you leave. It is the architecture of understanding that you are responsible for something, that the something extends beyond yourself, that the extension beyond yourself is not a burden, but is in fact the entire point. I was one of those people. I knew it by the middle of my first year, which is called plebe year, which is also the hardest year of most people's lives up to that point. I did not find it the hardest year of my life. I found it clarifying. I came home for the holidays during those 4 years, and I sat at the Marsh family table, and I ate the same dinners, and I was the same person my mother had always known, which is to say the person she could not quite see clearly, the one who was doing something she did not understand and had never endorsed. She never asked about it directly. I never volunteered much. We kept the relationship in the same shape it had always occupied, which was functional and distant in the specific way that mother-daughter relationships can be when both people are very private and neither one knows quite how to reach across the distance. I graduated in May of 1992 and was commissioned as an ensign. My mother attended the ceremony. She sat in the bleachers and watched, and afterward she found me in the crowd and shook my hand, a handshake, not a hug, and told me congratulations. Linda was not there. She had just had a pregnancy scare and did not feel up to the trip. Roger sent a card that said, more or less, that he had heard it was a difficult program and that he was glad I had survived it. I reported to my first posting in June. I was 22 years old. I was the daughter of Warren Marsh, Chief Petty Officer, United States Navy, who had died in a training accident in 1977 and who had been gone longer than he had been present in my life, by a significant margin, and whose choice, to serve, to commit, to give the thing his life, I had now formally replicated. I would like to say that I thought about him constantly in those early years. I did not. I thought about the work. The work demanded all of it, and I gave it all, and that is what the work is for. It does not leave you much room for the things that are not the work. But he was always there underneath it. He is still there underneath it. He has been there underneath every decision I have made since 1977, not as a ghost and not as a presence exactly, but as a fact about the world that I have organized my life around. I spent 8 years between 1992 and 2000 doing work inside naval intelligence that I can sketch but not detail. I was good at it. This is not a boast. It is a professional assessment. An accurate professional self-assessment is one of the things the Navy teaches you to do without sentiment. I had an aptitude for pattern recognition, for the kind of sustained analytical attention that intelligence work requires, and for the particular combination of caution and decisiveness that makes a good intelligence officer. I moved up through the junior officer ranks with speed that was reasonable, but not exceptional. 2 years as an ensign and lieutenant junior grade. Promotion to lieutenant at 26, lieutenant commander at 30. Each promotion was an assessment. Each one passed, the work continued. None of this was something I could talk about at Thanksgiving, which is fine. There is a great deal that cannot be talked about at Thanksgiving, and I have become, over the years, very comfortable with that. What I could talk about were the things that everyone can talk about: the weather, the food, the sports teams, the children's milestones. I talked about those things. Roger talked about his contracts and his conferences and the defense industry and how the Navy needed to think more efficiently about its supply chains. I ate my food, and I listened, and I said occasionally something like, "That is interesting, Roger." And he would continue, because Roger has never needed very much encouragement to continue. There is one more moment I want to tell you about from those years before the mess hall. One more specific scene from the long middle of the story. It was at a Memorial Day cookout at Linda and Roger's house in the summer of 2019. I was a vice admiral by then, though Roger did not know this. The cookout had the usual shape. Roger had a new grill and was very proud of it. There were neighbors and cousins and the ordinary cheerful chaos of a summer gathering. Tyler was 19 at that point and already working with a trainer to prepare his body for what he intended it to do. He was in the pool doing laps when I arrived. Not playing, training, long, steady, measured laps with the turn at each end, done with the precision of someone who has been practicing that specific turn for years. I sat in a lawn chair and watched. Roger came over with a beer and said, 19 years old and built like a tank. Gets it from the Callahan side, that physicality. He said it to the neighbor beside him, not to me, which I have always found instructive. The things Roger says to other people while I am present have always been more revealing than the things he says directly to me. I did not respond. I watched Tyler come off the turn at the far end of the pool, and I thought about a conversation I'd had earlier that week, in a different state, in a building that Roger would not be permitted to enter, about an operation that was going to matter in a way that cookouts and new grills do not matter. I thought about how these two things, the pool, the classified conversation, occupied the same person, and how the people at the cookout had no idea, and how that was all right. It had always been all right. What I had not anticipated at that Memorial Day cookout in 2019 was that 5 years later, Tyler would be completing the most advanced qualification offered by the teams, and I would be attending as both his aunt and his commanding officer's commanding officer, and that the morning before his ceremony, a Navy SEAL would shove me in a mess hall and 4 admirals would walk through a door. Life does not go where you plan it. It goes where the sum of all your choices and all your commitments and all your kept promises takes it. Which is, when you think about it, the right direction. After the ceremony, after the reception, after Roger's damage control smile, and Linda's quiet correction of it, I drove back to my quarters on base, and I sat on the small porch, and I looked at the water. It was evening. The base had the particular quiet of an evening following a large, ceremonially significant day. I thought about Senior Chief Rook, not with anger, not with satisfaction, just with a kind of professional sympathy. He had made a mistake based on the information available to him. The information available to him had been catastrophically incomplete. He would learn from it. That is what professionals do. I thought about my father, about a chaplain holding his cover in both hands at a door in Virginia Beach in 1977, about a 7-year-old who did not cry, about the weight of a thing you decide at 7 without knowing you are deciding it and carry for the next 49 years. I thought about Tyler swimming his laps in the pool at 19 while Roger explained genetics to the neighbor. About Tyler at 22 receiving his trident. About Tyler at 27, steady and composed in the ceremonial hall, receiving something he had earned across a decade of unglamorous, disciplined, genuine effort. He is the best of what my father gave us. Tyler did not know Warren Marsh. He was born 22 years after my father died. But he carries something of the same quality. The seriousness that does not need to announce itself. The commitment that is visible, not in what you say, but in what you keep showing up to do. I think my father would have recognized it immediately. I think he would have been proud of both of them, Tyler and the woman Tyler calls Aunt Ellie, the one who has been showing up since 1999. The water was dark and flat by the time I went inside. I had an early briefing the next morning. I set my alarm for 500, which is half an hour later than I usually set it, because the previous day had been a long one, and I had decided to be generous with myself. I made a cup of tea in the small kitchen. I read for a while, not briefing materials, just reading, a thing I rarely do in the evenings and had decided to do. I thought, just before I turned off the light, about the photograph. The Naval Academy graduation, 1992. My mother's text, the week after the mess hall. Found this, with a picture of the photograph. I had had a copy on my desk for 34 years. She had had a copy in a box in her closet for 34 years. We had, it turned out, been keeping the same photograph in our separate parts of the world for the entire length of my career. She in a box because she did not know what to do with it. Me on my desk because it reminded me every morning of the beginning of the sentence I was still finishing. It is not nothing that the doors opened. It is not nothing that the room adjusted. But the room is not the point. The room has never been the point. The point is the 34 years of arriving early. The point is the coffee before the room is ready for you. The point is the choice, made once and kept continuously, to be the person you actually are in every room you enter. Whether the room knows who that person is or not, keep being it. Keep showing up, the doors will open. I have thought, in the months since April, about what I would say to Senior Chief Rook if I were to speak to him directly. I have not done so. It would be inappropriate for an admiral to seek out an enlisted operator to address a personal matter, and it is not something I would do. But I have thought about what I would say if the circumstance were different. I would not say what you might expect. I would not tell him that his assumptions were wrong, because he would already know that. I would not tell him that rank deserves respect, because he already knows that too, in the specific and thorough way that career enlisted personnel understand rank, perhaps better than most officers understand it. I would tell him something simpler. I would tell him that the categories we use to assess people, who belongs, who does not, who is capable, who is not, who deserves the room, and who should be redirected toward the parking lot, are always incomplete. Every category is always incomplete. The person in front of you is always more than the information you have about them. Always. Even when you are right about the surface, and the surface is not the person. This is true inside the military. It is true everywhere. I grew up in Virginia Beach as the daughter of a man who died serving a country that would go on for decades without knowing his name. He was a chief petty officer, an excellent one by all accounts, though I have spent my adult life reconstructing those accounts from documents and from the occasional conversation with someone who served with him and recognized my surname. He was not a flag officer. He did not make it to the room where the flag officers sit. He died at 36 with 2 commendations and a family who loved him and a 7-year-old daughter who was paying attention. I made it to that room. I made it, and then I became one of the people who runs it. And I think about him every day that I sit in it, about whether the decisions I am making would make sense to him, about whether the weight of the thing we both chose is being carried with the care that it deserves. It is. I try to make sure of that. The soup at my mother's table in March tasted exactly like it had in 1978. Tyler laughed until Linda cried. Patricia smiled with her whole face. I sat at the kitchen sink and dried the dishes while my mother washed them, and outside the window the Virginia Beach dark settled over the water the same way it has always settled over it, and it was enough. It was entirely, completely, more than enough. I want to be honest with you about something. I did not feel triumphant when those doors opened. I felt corrected. Like something that had been described wrong for 30 years had finally been described accurately, and now the people in the room knew it. That is different from triumph. I think it matters that it is different. If someone in your life has been explaining you to yourself for years and getting it wrong, you do not need their correction to know who you are. You have always known. The work is just continuing to be it. Every day, in every room, whether the door is open or not. What I would love to know, has there been a moment in your life when something was finally seen correctly? When the room had to adjust? Tell me in the comments. And if this story meant something to you, I would be grateful if you subscribed and shared it with someone who needs to hear it today.